Bam.
This is Chris Daly, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Holy shit. Delta Company 165th, rocking the house. I don't know. So here's the thing. I hang out with a lot of Marines, and they love being in the Marines, right? They're some bananas about it. And then probably almost on the other side of the spectrum for like ground holding troop type people, because I'm not going to include the Air Force and Coast Guard in this because I just don't know those guys well enough. Are probably CI agents who really don't want to associate with anybody else. We want to be out in the furthest field office away. We want to be left alone. No, we don't like you. No, we don't want to hang out with you. No, we don't want to play softball in your stupid unit team. I mean, that's pretty true, right?
Yeah, it's about right.
But counterintelligence agents, nonetheless, here we are. We are a mixed bag. How would you describe what we do, counterintelligence as a whole?
What, as I used to describe to my parents in Bosnia, we drive around and talk to people. It helped them wrap their head around it. But it varies, right? Because I was in Bosnia, clearly that was what we did. When I was in Korea, we did a lot more liaison work and actual investigations. But for the most part, the tactical side, like a couple years in Bosnia, I was there. It was just I'll drive around talking to people, seeing what's going on.
I always said to my friends, they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, if you saw me work, there's two things that are different about me when I'm home and when I'm working overseas. One is if you saw me working, you would swear to God I didn't work for 1 minute. If I always I have a rule, like if you offer me a drink, I have to say yes. These are the things that I do overseas. And also I'm hyper alpha when I go out and I go work, right? It's 20-hour days. If they need it, if it's a 36-hour day, that happens. I'm not that dude when I'm home, and I'm like, I'm a lot more come as they are and lackadaisical. Are you a different dude when you deploy?
Oh man, I was on just that back then. I was on deployment after deployment, right? Before we went down to Bosnia, I was 6 months in Macedonia on a UN mission. I came back, barely any turnaround, and then did my year there, and then a couple months later came back, or a little bit later in February of 1987, I came back from Bragg for another 8 months in Bosnia. So I don't know. I just wanted to stay away from the flagpole. I mean, the best thing about Bragg is not being at Bragg. Right. I just stayed deployed as much as I possibly could. Stayed busy, just worked crazy hours, made lots of money. It was the best way to be. But yeah, different. Sure. I mean, out there, especially Bosnia, it was my comfort zone. I speak Bosnian or spoke Bosnian, so it was just easy to get into it.
You and Chief McDermott, is that right? Went up to that Macedonian mission.
Dan, yeah. It was me, Dan McDermott, Justin, I can't remember his last name, really nice guy, and Ray Duvall.
Right, Ray Duvall. How was Ray Duvall?
I saw him a few years. How was it? He's still the same as he was. He was, he was there with us. He's this very awkward guy. Awkward guy. It was love-hate. I would kind of feel bad for him, and then he'd just do something that just drove me out of my mind, and I would ice him out, and then eventually I'd kind of feel bad for him. This is a circle of something.
I don't want to talk bad about Ray Duvall, but I think he's a great example of what happens in our field where you qualify to get in because of your intellect or the way you test or whatever it is, and then you get there, and it's like, wow, you stand out as someone that is hard to get along with. How on earth are you going to do this job? Like, if we were to go to Berlin, Ray's not going to be able to go out and go to these liaison meetings because you'd be like, what the fuck did you just do? There's just people that aren't built for this kind of mission, but they can do other things really well within the field.
Yeah, I'm very right, very smart, but I just can't see him interacting with most humans.
That's not rare in our field, though.
Nope. But, it's funny. There are some real introverts, but then I recall a few guys, they really rise to the occasion. They are in the moment and just it turns on. And you're like, how is that not on all the time? Right. But, yeah, they get into it and that laser focus kicks in, I guess.
What was that Macedonia mission like? It was one of the things I had targeted when I was there. And I'm like, I got to get me out there to Macedonia. That was really the only game in town if you wanted to do something besides sit at Garrison all day.
So it was, we were UNPROFOR when I went down there, United Nations Protection Force. While I was there, it switched to UNPRODEP, United Nations Preventive Deployment. So we based out of Tuzla out of Skopje in Macedonia. And a lot of what we did, because Mr. Dan McDermott was there, we would drive up to the borderlands. We had a series of observation posts along the Serb border. The whole premise was in case the Serbs roll in,
right?
Since they've done it other places, we could keep track on them. So we had the American sector with 312 mechanized infantry, bunch of OPs along the border, and then we had the Norwegian battalion that had a mix of Scandinavians that had their own section, and just kind of watch the border. So a lot of us going up there on a regular basis to see what the infantry guys and those OPs are seeing, do a little liaison with the cops, make sure everything was cool, talk to the locals a little bit. It was very peaceful. I don't imagine anything was ever going to really happen there.
But partly because you guys were there, it becomes a real problem when the UN is sitting there and you decide to go whack a bunch of UN people or drive over the top of their position. That gets the attention of a lot of people if you do that, right?
Yep.
So,
it wasn't much longer later when I remember when we finally went into Kosovo, KFOR. Right before then, they snatched a bunch of Americans, a couple of Americans, like a Humvee full of Americans, right off the border, and we drove through that area all the time when I was down there. Of course, there was nothing going on at the time, but different times.
The other thing I want to ask you about with that whole thing, when you deploy on these kind of things, are you civilian clothes? Do you have any kind of a cover, or is this this open collection kind of thing that we had to do later on in Bosnia?
It was all uniform. The variation, right? We had white trucks, White Hawks instead of Black Hawks. We wore our blue baseball hats. Downtown, we wore blue berets. We were issued ascots, which I never wore. But the mortar platoon that was providing guard downtown apparently wore theirs. It was all for it. The purpose was to be seen, to be out there. That the presence was known.
Funny show note. I said, "Hey, Chris, make sure you've got an ascot or a neckerchief handy for the episode." And we knew I was joking, but apparently not that far off the truth.
Yeah, I thought it was a cummerbund when they first gave it to me, which also I wouldn't have known how to use. But yeah.
I gotta say, hey, what up to Damian and Dragan, who are my Macedonians who help me run the show. They handle like most of the podcast side of things. So what up, fellas? It looks Skopje just made the show again. It's always fun to have those guys on. Yeah. And they're great, man. I love those guys. I want to get back out to the Balkans and go hang with them. You know, here's the thing. We didn't know any of this, right? Well, maybe you did because you had done the deployment, but these are wonderful people by and large. Yes, they had to do some horrible things to one another and to themselves and everything else. But when you got there, just super friendly, super hospitable people. And we're people that go into their homes. So we got to see the best of that, you know, and you learn that, like, you say things like, this is God's country. And the people in Macedonia, the people in Bosnia are probably the most hospitable place in the earth. And then they just go double down and they want to be hospitable and they want to talk to you. And it makes you a good guest. I mean, that's sort of how I saw that whole area. But you know as well as I do, it's full of history. They're super proud of it. No matter what era of history it is, they can tell you a chapter and verse all about it.
Yep. I saw in Macedonia, one of our OPs was near this contested piece of land that had just a really, in my version, like unremarkable monument, but you know, that was the thing. And then same thing in Bosnia. They just it all meant something to people. That was their land, and I'm sure stuff happened there. But yeah, that's what I think really tore a lot of them up when they had to leave the place they'd lived for such a long time. That meant such a lot to them.
You having language skills set you apart from us as peers, right? It made you, you know, able to go and do things, and you were good at languages. I mean, as far as I recall. Is the have you continued to expand that capability? Was that unique? Is that something you dedicated yourself to and got through the challenges of it? Talk a little bit about that capacity.
When I joined the Army, I was a SIGINT person, 98 Golf, and I got sent to DLI for Czech, which meant 0 to an 18-year-old idiot. So I was terrible as a student, really just super mediocre. And yet at the end, when we graduated, only myself and one other guy who was infinitely smarter than I was got 3s. So somewhere and at that point I had an epiphany, like, oh, I think I'm good at learning languages. Yeah. So my first assignment in the Army was at the NSA, and everyone saw the writing on the wall. We're going to get into the Balkans eventually. So they initiated the program they called Turbo Serbo, where they took Polish, Russian, and Czech speakers and taught us Serbian because we were at a base in Slavic language. So I had that, and then I covered a lot of Balkan stuff. And then I changed over to be a counterintelligence agent. And I liked it. I mean, just connecting with people, being legit about it. Americans, we have such a bad rep as speaking only English. So you just can connect so much better with people when you can speak their language.
How long does it take the average person in the military in our field? So they're plenty smart. How long does it take them to because even 3.3, as you know, like 3.3, for anybody that doesn't know, 3.3 means you graduated and you got a pretty good grasp of the language, but there's numbers above that. That's nowhere near native speaking.
It's like basic fluency, I think, is the term for threes.
Basic fluence, right? Yeah. So 3+, 3+, 4, 5, 5, whatever it's going to be, right? So how long does that take, and how reliably can the Army do that? And you want to say, why doesn't the Army just language train? If I've given, I don't know, a dozen IVs pre-deployment, why don't they just send me to language school and then go to the Czech Republic and practice it in real life? Why don't they do that more? They just don't. They don't do that.
Well, I mean, it's time consuming, right? I think like another place, the State Department, Arabic and Chinese and those things, those are 2-year courses to really get it, and that's just to hit basic fluency.
Right.
So I think it's time consuming. We suck at predicting things, and it's also perishable, right? So you could train everyone up all you want, but if you don't use it, it goes away. So my conversion from Czech to Serbo was easier because I already had a base, but there was a while where Czech still clogged up my brain until I got it all cleaned out and was just 100% Bosnian.
Right. And then like Arabic is a great example. You go learn modern standard Arabic, and then you go to Iraq, and it's like, you don't speak Arabic. Like everybody understands what you're saying, but you're like, and hitherto the person, it's like you have like this old English style form of Arabic as opposed to the super country version of Arabic that Iraqis speak, depending on which province you're in as well, too. You're like, what do you mean there's 1,000 different words for common things here? It's just crazy.
For me, I was shameless. My great skill was I did not care. My joke was always, I'd tell people in the language, I don't care if I sound like Tarzan, as long as you understand me. So I didn't care. I have no shame if I sound like a just troglodyte speaking Bosnian, fine, as long as I got my point across. And that, made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah. I always said that I was like Chewbacca. You could talk to me, and I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I would go brah back to you. Like I couldn't, because you do. I mean, I picked up a lot of, Serbian, Bosnian language because I sat there and I heard it all the time, and it was translated to me. And you pick up the basic words, and you start to learn to conjugate. It doesn't mean that I can do it on the fly, but you're immersed in it, and so you do pick a lot of it up.
It was hard. One of the weird things I got sliced off for was, I can't remember how far in it was when they went in and kicked everyone out of the zone of separation, right? Like all heavy weapons had to be out of there. So I got attached to some small infantry unit, and for like a week and a half, we just drove around kicking people out of the ZOS. And that was usually me translating. I think it was a captain or a major. And there was just one day we've been going all over the place translating, and he was pretty cool. He understood how to use a translator because I was just absolutely tapped out, and I think he just saw me just like staring off into space. He's like, "Are you okay? Or should we call it a day?" I'm like, "Yeah, we should definitely call it a day." And he's like, "All right, cool, we can hit tomorrow." But we all had our limits.
This is an important thing to realize. I always try to explain this, so let me set the stage, and then you kind of just expand on that. If I'm going to go on a mission, I'm the guy that has to do my own pre-planning of my own mission. I have to go conduct the mission, which might mean going on a mission that's 10 hours long, and I've got 2 hours of work in that 10 hours, but you're hiking over a mountain or whatever crazy thing we do. And then you got to come back and recover from that. Maybe you take a nap, maybe you take a shower, whatever it is that you do to like get your head right, or maybe you don't. Maybe you go right back out the gate and go on another mission because they're like, Turner, come on, let's go. And you're like, yep. Because just like shots in combat zones, if someone says we're going on a mission, you always say yes. And then you come back and you're like, I have all of these notes. I've got to download. I've got to expand this stuff. I've got to maybe write something or at least put enough notes into a document so I can take what's not really anything yet and turn it into a soup later on and give somebody something, right? And then you look up and you're like, oh shit, it's tomorrow already, and I have to go on a patrol in 3 hours. You know, it's man, that pace of work and the amount of work we take on, and because we're the only ones that can do it, you're obliged to do it. But talk a little bit about what it's like, that pace of work in a day in the life for you.
Yeah, I mean, down there it was tough. I can't remember how many Serbo linguists we had, but I think it was just a couple of us. I remember they started sending anyone who spoke any Serbo, because we had a tiny little woman, Mala, we called her, which is small in Bosnian. She just finished Navy boot camp. She didn't have a job. She was seaman recruit. That was her rank. She was a seaman recruit, and she got sent to live in a tent with 11 dudes for however long that was. So yeah, that was hard. But it's you just go from one thing to the next and get some sleep and go on. Initially, it was a grind. It just never really stopped until things kind of settled into more of a pace.
One of the things I like to figure out is when did you become a good agent? And if you haven't done it enough, and this doesn't apply to you, if you've gone on one or two deployments, you think that like right around 24 months or right around 36, whatever it is, that's when you became good. And the truth is if you keep going out and you stay at the ground level, you get better and better and better and a lot better, right? Because for the most part, when you deploy as an agent, you might be on the ground for a grand total of 18 months in an entire career, right? And it's just not enough time to develop that real ground proficiency. So when do you think it really fully turned on and you realized you can look around at your peers and be like, this person needs training in the following areas to get caught up? Because we don't get a lot of that on the ground mentoring.
No, and that mission, I mean, we saw it coming, right? We knew when the Croats started taking back the Krajina and they started meeting in Dayton, we knew it was coming. But yeah, we'd do our training at Hohenfels and we'd try all those things, but I don't know that anyone was ready for it. So did I become good at it? I don't know. I don't know if I ever became good at it. I just muscled through it, and I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like we did the best we had. We could with what we had. We got out there, figured out the people to talk to, tried to get the information back as best we could. And sometimes it was on us. Hey, let's go to this village. Why not? Let's try this one. Let's see what this is working on. It was just on a day-to-day basis, figuring out what are we doing? What do we need to know? Who should we ask? And then asking the questions and not compelling them, but getting them to want to answer your questions, giving them a reason. Like, we're here to help. We legitimately here to help, explaining it so that they would want to tell you the answers to your questions.
One of the challenges of what we do is we write reports and they go up, and then someone does something with them and they never tell us a goddamn thing. Maybe they give us a tasking and you're like, where did this tasking come from? Like, it makes no sense to your day-to-day mission. And especially if you're in Macedonia, who are you writing reports for? And then how do you shape your mission day in, day out? Because it's the information just goes up, right? You don't ever get any kind of, hey, good job, bad job, do less, do more. It's really up to you. And the other thing I want to add in there is, like, you have to have the ability to defend yourself on the camp from us, because we are shitty partners with counterintelligence people. And so that also can limit how you do your mission, if you get to do your mission at all. So first, talk about how do you guide your day-to-day mission? And then what about the enemy within?
We staked out our zone. I can't remember how things got divvied up, but we had an area like sort of central north of Tuzla. And we just kind of picked our rotations. I think we kind of settled in after a while on these are the towns we should go to, and we'd hit them with some regularity so that we'd become familiar. They'd kind of get to know us. They'd like to talk to us. And it was a little bit on the Bosnian side, a little on the Serb side. Serbs were always a little more frosty when we rolled over there. And then we just started making a rhythm of it, making a routine so they'd know we were coming. What was the second part of your question, Pete?
Well, and then the enemy within, right? Oh, but let me back up though and talk about the daily rhythm of what you do. So if you don't have guidance from like a company level unit, or you're responding to some Norwegian major, right? Again, does the information flow down to you guys so you can kind of tweak what you're doing, or do you just stick with the information requirements that they have and just kind of say, we know our basic job, and as long as we're doing this, everyone's going to leave us alone?
There was an element of no news is good news. I mean, we had I think, a set format of a report of observe no anti-I4 graffiti, no, witness no actions, something like that. So, I mean, I assume they get those reports and look at the map and be like, all right, this place is good today.
Right.
And then, when stuff pop up, we get vectored in on things. There was a time where Sapna, it was like, if you went from Tuzla and drove out through, was that Doehle, I think, on the way towards the river Zvornik. North from there, there's a place called Sapna that had held out. The Bosnians kept that the whole war. But Bosnians were moving back into their old villages on the Serb side of the line. And buildings started blowing up at night.
Right.
So we got sicked on that to figure out what was going on. And that was odd or interesting because at one point we were doing joint patrols with the Russian airborne brigade that was there. They'd had a couple of BTRs and we'd have a couple of Humvees and go do that together. So, sometimes things popped up that we were specifically focused on something. And since we were the ones based at Tuzla, sort of like the extra team, we would get those missions a lot.
By the way, down below is the link for the Ride for the Brave, for the fundraiser that I'm doing. I'm going to put that in the into the comments right now while we're chatting. We're about to go on Friday. Scott Husing and I and the rest of the Save the Brave lunatics, we're going to ride across the nation. Scott rides on his motorcycle. I follow my truck. We raise money, and what we're fighting is veteran suicide. And when the inevitable does happen, we want to be able to support those families. But in the meantime, try to catch these veterans before they get to the end of the road and get them loved up, get them engaged, and hopefully get them to the resources that will help make them want to stay alive. This is what we do. And this is why we do this. We go across the nation. Believe me, Scott and I get the call all the time. And we're sick of it. And so we're willing to, I call it veteran Ramadan. We're willing to drive from Tucson or Temecula to Tucson, all 100 degrees and above, which goes through Yuma, by the way. And then El Paso, Odessa, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Birmingham, Charleston, Atlanta, Charleston. Those are all the things. Not one of those places is a very comfortable place, but that's the place that that veterans are in when they're in that point where they're considering ending their own life. They're suffering. And so this is how you help us. You just go to that link down below and we'll put the effort in. We know these folks. We can grab them, hopefully put our arms around them and get them turned around in the other direction. But we need your help. So if you're inclined to do that. We're going this year, at least I am, in honor of my brother who passed away, veteran suicide, in October. And so when we look at this, like I'm trying to save my own life from the same thing, and my brother, we lose him. So this stuff happens right next to us. 2 years ago when we did this, Scott lost one of his very best friends he grew up with. He drank himself to death, and we had to drive across the nation to go bury him. So this happens all the time. It's constantly around us, and this is how we choose to fight it is by going out and doing these things, and your help will be appreciated. Ride for the Brave in general, or you can just go to savethebrave.org and you can figure out how to help with that. Look in the comments here and you'll see the link for that. Just a real quick timeout real quick there, Chris, to support this thing since we leave on Friday.
Good cause.
The enemy within, right? So because even our own intel officers often don't know what a counterintelligence team does, they just assume that we're fooling around. And to their credit, we probably are. And it probably looks exactly like that, right? So because our job has a lot of fun appearance to it. It is fun. It's exciting and everything else. Then you get an infantry commander who doesn't know the first thing about what we do. And oh my gosh, it gets really hard to be able to go out unless you have a good NCO or a good warrant or a good officer in front of you. And that is not a reliable thing to count on to be able to defend your ability to go out and do your job.
Yeah. I guess we had pretty good experiences there. And I remember when we left, that year was over, if I recall correctly, like there were the units we got sliced off to, all the teams got sent off to. wanted to take them back to Germany with them and keep them forever. So I agree with you. It started off, who are these idiots? What are they doing? And then I think it ended up as, wow, those people told me things that I never could have figured out on my own. And yeah, so I think we burned a place in their hearts that carried on into, the Gulf, and appreciation for what we do and bring to the table.
Not all the teams were that successful, though. There were teams that their E4s got absorbed into details and all these kind of things, right? Because the leadership.
I got absorbed into detail. I had to go when they closed Lukovac. Do you remember? I think his name was Phil, kind of tall guy. He was back at Tuesday. He said he had a bit of a stutter.
Yeah, that's Phil. Yeah.
Yep. So me, one of the few Serbo-linguists in the unit, an NCO. When they're closing down Lukovac, Phil and I had a week of just sleeping all day and doing guard duty at night while they tore it apart. Genius. Good job, Army. Good job.
Yeah. two of the hardest assets to train up and get out into the field, and then you guys are doing guard duty.
Yep. But yeah, I think there was an element of that, but I don't know. I'm kind of a Pollyanna. I felt like we were always being put to pretty good use, and we had quite a bit of latitude to do what we wanted. So I felt like we had a fair amount of freedom there at Doehle anyway. I think it was different other places.
In other places, yeah. Well, one of the things is we're weird, right? So you had to have a 4-vehicle convoy to leave the camp. We had a cluster where we could ride around with 2 vehicles, which we used to our advantage all the time. Or you just walk off the camp, you and 4 people, and then I saw your picture from Bosnia, and you've got a pistol. That's all you've got, right? We weren't in a position to get into any kind of a gunfight, and I don't know about your team. We had no radio. We had no man-portable radio to speak of, and so we left. Yeah. There's no communicating with us. And then when you arrive back, you couldn't call in and be like, hey, don't shoot us. We're coming back, right? And then the person on guard duty is probably disgruntled, probably hasn't slept well, and probably in trouble with somebody. And then you come walking up in your uniform, and oh my gosh, that can be a real dangerous proposition.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, we would go out in 2 vehicles, and I swear to God, every single time, where are the other 2 vehicles? Oh, I need to call. It's like, really? I swear to God, I did this with you yesterday, specialist.
Yeah,
but sure. It was frustrating because they just didn't get it. Before we even went down, I remember there was some loopy warrant officer in the unit who was telling us we're going to be moving in platoons and people aren't coming back. People are going to die.
Yes.
That guy was insane. But yeah, then quickly we got rid of all that stuff. We're able to do all the things we needed to do, and it was fine.
One of the things that is true, though, is our pre-deployment training would not, given what our job is, would not resemble what any other unit would do for training. And we didn't do a lot of it. We spent a lot of time driving to Darmstadt. We spent a lot of time, watching the winter driving video. We did not. You would think if Pete was the commander, if Pete was the colonel, right? Like, I don't know what your Echo Company guys do, but keep doing infantry stuff. I'm going to go focus on these intel people. You would be doing role plays and meets and practicing talking all of the goddamn time. We would never stop. You would do it 10 hours a day. And then it'd be like, all right, you've trained hard today. Have a good day. Go home. We didn't do anything like that. I literally had no idea what we were supposed to do day in, day out. It turned out it was talking to people, but they could have told us, and they could have let us train on that instead of training on, I don't know, with the stupid stuff that we did all the time. How on earth did we do such a good job? How on earth did we go to these units and bring them so much stuff that they wanted to bring us home with?
I think we had good people. People figured it out, right? Good team leaders. Good at the flagpole. Mr. Garland. And then the other warrant officer was back there. That guy was super clever. I wish I could recall his name. They, I think, gave good lessons and taught us. And then the rest of us, we just had to figure it out, right? It's like a puzzle. I think most counterintelligence agents like puzzles. Yeah. I'm not talking about New York Times crossword, but like the puzzle. How do I fit into this? What do I do?
Right.
And at the core of it, how do I keep people safe? I think that motivates people and gets your juices flowing when you're thinking, okay, this is existential stuff. What must I do? When thrown into the pool, you swim or you sink. And I think for the most part, we all swam.
When I got back to the States on my next assignment, I ended up at Huachuca and ultimately in the Counterintelligence Force Protection Source Operation course, CIFSO, what they call it. This is for the
I took
audience.
that once.
And um, how in the world the Army didn't do this, right? But it was Nancy Richards ended up being at Huachuca, so she knew I got there, and she's like, "I'm going to take care of you." And so for a while, as an E4, I was the 2 for the 309th MI Battalion, which was like, 4,000 people because it's a training battalion, huge thing. And then and she's like, I'm going to bring you over to CIFSO. And so I was there, but I was there to be a computer guy. That's how she got me in. This guy's going to help us with computers and such. Down the hall was John Murray teaching counterterrorism and like a solo teacher shop. Like he was only him and like a warrant. And so they had, nobody really to answer to as long as they graduated people, they were good. But I had snuck myself somehow into this source operations course immediately after running sources, right? And it didn't even occur to me that this was the case until I went to Fort Gordon. We did a mobile train up for the Fort Gordon folks who deploy, and we did a CIFSO course there. And Jason Wood, who was one of the chiefs that was in our company, said, "Hey, you realize you and McGowan, my partner, you guys ran the first 2 sources, legitimate sources under the new source program." And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew we ran sources, but I just kind of figured everybody else ran sources too. He's like, nope. You guys are like some of the only ones in all of theater. There was maybe like, I don't know, 5 or something like that, 5 legitimate sources. And I'm going on memory. I have no idea how many there were, but I had no idea that this had happened. And nobody in Delta Company is like, hey, Pete, that's an incredible thing you just did. Good job. It was more like good riddance. Get out of here. I got my end of tour award from another E4 in the battalion, and they're like, "Get out of here, go, see you later," and like didn't even get it presented. It's so backwards to what I've seen of the rest. I thought the whole Army was like that, where it's all just a shit show and bad personalities mixing together. But think about that, like someone who ran sources went and taught at the source course immediately after running sources. That's not a design that the Army does. Why is that?
Should be.
Yeah, should be.
Yeah. I did CIFSO and I found it very educational. I was like, oh, okay. A lot of it was like, oh, these are truths I learned on the ground. I'm glad you've codified them so that people can learn this for a change. But then again, a lot of it was very strategic level stuff that was taught by as uninspiring people. So I don't know if it was all applicable in some places, but like the core tenets of it, of scheduling meetings and having commo plans and how to deal with people, that was pretty good. Bit of work, but no, the training at Huachuca, like for the counterintelligence agent course, I guess they taught us how to write things and they taught us how to ask questions, but it was nothing like what we faced when we got to Bosnia. I only had a little bit of a leg up because my time in Macedonia was basically a version of what we did in Bosnia. But no, I think we all shone because we had no idea what we're getting into and we just did it anyway and did it well.
You're right about that strategic element that kind of slid into the course after us because there wasn't meant to be specifically a tactical school. And I think it should have been. They should have made like, you need to have tactical experience to come in the door here. Otherwise, you're really going to be irrelevant because the pace of work is different when you deploy. You had a very unique, and almost all CI careers are, but you had a very unique leg up in that world because you had that Macedonian, almost like a practice deployment ahead of time. And then you came back, and then you came back, and then you came back. Did you go to 4 times to the Balkans?
3. So I did Macedonia for 6 months, a year in Bosnia, and then like 8 more months in Bosnia.
Did you go to Kosovo?
Nope. Missed that one. They sent me to Korea.
Okay. The other K. And then did you go anywhere else after Korea?
No, after Korea. Well, so I was a brag and I went to Korea. And then my last year in the Army was up at Fort Lewis, where I got out after 12 years.
After 12 years. When you get out of 12 years, everybody's wondering, at least on the military side, why don't you just stay in? Why don't you do 8 more years, go be a warrant officer for a couple of years and have a good retirement and then do whatever's next?
Yeah, I always thought of that like the dude in Shawshank Redemption who gets out and then hangs himself. It's like he's institutionalized or whatever they call him. He's an institutional man. I'm like, I don't need this. Everyone really was looking at me like I was insane because I got out. I started my terminal leave in October 2001. we all know what was happening then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I was happy to walk away. I enjoyed it. Like I loved it. It was great. I missed a lot of a part of it, but I got what I wanted, and I was good. And I moved on.
Yeah. Would you change anything about your career?
Nope, I liked it.
It
I
was
was,
pretty good, right?
things I didn't want to do necessarily. I going to Korea. I had no interest in going to Korea just because I'd heard all the stories. Just I let people's other people's thoughts fill my mind, and then I got there, loved it, just loved it, and yeah, I got everything I wanted out of it. And I always wanted to be in the Army. My grandfather was in the Army for 30 years, and I'd always heard his stories, and I always wanted to. And yeah, I loved it. And I don't think I'd change a thing about it, including getting out after 12 years.
Chris had a thing that he did. He had his grandfather's ribbon as one of the ribbons that he had, and it was a little bit beat up and not perfect. And you could always be like, "That's my grandfather's ribbon," and they'd be like, "Oh, sorry." It's a great way to put people on the back foot. I remember that.
Good memory.
I learned a couple of things from you. You were a good NCO, man. You had the right attitude.
I did not know that until man, I wish I could recall his name. He was just a good kid, specialist when we were at Tuzla. And I think I was sweeping one day when they built us that tent up by the gate. And yeah, he's really flattering, touched me. I still obviously remember this. It's like when I make sergeant, I want to be just like you, Sergeant Daly.
Oh man.
And I was like, man, thanks. I think it was just because I was sweeping when I was just sitting around. But, I try to be a good model for people, model good behavior, actually give a shit about people.
Yeah.
It's amazing power. Most people don't exercise.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't act like the ones that were bad. That's for sure. You were likable, approachable, and we all, even though when I knew you, you were just one rank above us, you were clearly more seasoned than all of us, right? And so there was just an automatic respect, and it was cool to be able to hang out with you. Hey, Dickie's asking a question, and I want to bring this up. How does CI relate to cyber? What do you think is the good answer for that?
Back then, it didn't. But now, I think it's the two are so intermeshed, right? A good counterintelligence program with cyber is informing people what the threats are, identifying those threats, and just have good mitigation strategies on how to work with it. Yeah, when we did it, it wasn't a thing, but now, it's incumbent on from the basics of that is not a Nigerian prince, please, people, to investing in good software and good hardware and maintaining good practices. So I think, like most things in this world, CI is deeply enmeshed in it if it's going to be successful.
In all of my deployments and all of my study of military history to try to understand what the hell we were supposed to do, I've realized that Delta Company 165th deploying to Bosnia was a very rare thing and a bit of a unicorn. This wasn't a tanker fight, wasn't an infantry fight. Really, none of the line units had anything to do with success or failure of our mission. And it was really, honestly, it was us. And you had the dawn of the digital age. I mean, we got emails during this time. Mm-hmm. We went from literally writing with pencils on paper to entering information into Word, which if you have any capacity for Word, made you an absolute genius in the Army in terms of doing our job.
I remember we had Inmarsats. We had, do you remember those things? It was like two giant old school suitcases that took about 20 minutes to set up. And the name Inmarsat, I think it's International Maritime Satellite. It's meant to be used from the deck of a ship to hit a satellite. And we're using them in the forested mountains. Excellent. So we were getting, I remember we got mobile phones. The end of my first year, we got some super basic, whatever local network there was, mobile phones, so we could actually communicate with people.
The Trip Light system was that first system, and basically that was, I believe, some E4, E5 was like, hey, why don't we just buy this off-the-shelf equipment and make this system? And the off-the-shelf equipment was a camera, what amounted to a digital camera back then, a laptop, a way to carry it around, a printer, and then a scanner if you had the right system, right? And there was new generations and everything else. And oh, by the way, you have to get a new laptop every couple of years. You can't use the same laptop for 10 years, Army. And the Army's like, really? What? It's like, yeah, by the way, this all in $3,000. But we have a $10,000 system over here. It's called a tactical satellite. And, oh my God, it was crazy to have this jump forward And we were right there. We also were the dawn of this new way of collecting, this truly tactical, muddy boots, go outside the wire kind of collection that hadn't really existed in our careers, right? I mean, it was a new thing to do, not strategic, but this day-to-day open style of collection.
Yeah, and again, people didn't know what to make of us. That photograph I sent you, where I have the kind of grim look on my face at those Serbs, I got sliced off another time to drive around with these infantry guys to, again, a little bit later, but again, getting people out of the zone of separation. Those Serbs were, this is early, so those guys are still in their trenches. And they set up an OP, but my point being, I think at one point the captain or whoever was in charge of us, he actually told me, don't wander off. Like I'm a goddamn 5-year-old who, I'm like, I'm carrying a gun. I'm in a uniform just like you. I am fucking trained. I'm a counterintelligence agent. Don't wander off, thanks. So they were douchebags. So I just hung out with the Serbs all the time, and they made me coffee, and we talked, and it was fun.
How funny is it that you're saying they were douchebags, so I hung out with the Serbs instead? We really, what we were briefed on was not like the reality. Like we were briefed on, the Serbs are bad people and everything else. As soon as you got there and you started looking around, you're like, there's a bunch of assholes around here. We're among them. Like this isn't this cut and dry black and white thing that we were sort of given. It was something significantly more complex. Like we had these really super smart in the regular world, in the European world they lived in 5 years before. These are brilliant young people that are medical professionals that are going to probably become doctors and nurses, and now they're interpreters. And they're like, one guy's like, my father was a Serb, my mother was a Croat, and my grandpa was, he was the kind of Bosnian Serb that was like a mix with Arab culture and everything. It was just a mess to figure out who these people were. And so you're out drinking with the Serbs and having coffee or whatever you're going to have, Rocky or whatever it is. But that's reality. It was like there were a lot of people doing things, and you're like, well, you're not what we were told you were going to be. You guys are actually pretty cool people now that you don't have to fight each other.
And it was sad. Those guys in particular, I tell this story to a lot of people. I'm hanging out with them, and I'm just kind of like, hey, what's your guys' story? And one of them took me out to the edge of the ridge they were on, and they pointed. He's like, yes, that village down there. It's like, I don't know, handful of buildings. He's like, that's where we're all from. And before the war, we were, us and the Muslims all together. And then he takes me another part and he points off and he says, the Muslims are on that ridge over there. But those are all our neighbors and friends. And I can't remember which side it was which, but he said, yeah, on one side is a school teacher, and on the other side are the kids he used to teach. And on the other side is the constable who, someone got a little too much drink, they'd put him in the cell for a night so he could sleep it off. And the saddest thing was, he said, they're on their ridge, we're on our ridge, and all of us look down at our village all the time, and none of us can go there.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, okay, Serbs are kind of the bad guys in this, but it's just a tragedy for everybody.
Why did it work? I mean, I know there's different opinions on this, and the higher up you are, the more it was like, this is all going to work out. But where we were on the ground, it was like, do not leave the road. You're going to get killed. Do not, put yourself in a situation where you're going to get into a firefight because you're going to lose, and we were just waiting. And a lot of us thought it was halftime. That's a quote from Eric Kleinsmith, halftime between the next conflict. And really, that wasn't untrue. It wasn't halftime there, but in the Balkans in general, we were just waiting until the next conflict and the next conflict. So how dangerous was it? That's my question.
I think from them, an open conflict, I don't think it was very dangerous. The mines and stuff, when I first got there, also I got pulled off to work with this weird allied counterintelligence unit. They just needed a linguist. And one time we drove out to talk to the Muslims on the line. They're still in the trenches. And I'm talking to them, and you can see landmines everywhere, just everywhere, just scattered around the ground. And I'm asking him, where are the minefields? And he's like, all right, here in front of us and over there on the other side of the road. And he said, the bridge. I'm like, what bridge? He's like, the bridge you drove in on. I'm like, come on now. He's like, don't worry, it's command detonated though, so you guys are good. To which then I asked, how do we get out of here? He's like, you got to go over the bridge. I'm like, all right, I guess we're going over the bridge. But it was just really dangerous. But yeah, out in the world, I don't think so. I think we were intimidating. There's probably some they're tired of the conflict, and I don't think they wanted to mess with us. I think we came in heavy, and they just didn't want any of that business.
Look at these dangerous guys right here on the screen. That's Phil up there on Chris's left, and then Chief Garland, who you mentioned earlier. You know, these are the guys day in, day out. He wouldn't, like, if you hung out with us, we didn't seem that dangerous, but look at these guys. I'd be terrified that these guys were going to do something. You guys look like you mean business.
And that's actually with the Russians. That's on a BTR 60. We do jump patrols with the Russians, and we let them drive the Humvees, and they let us drive the BTR. Phil drove that BTR straight into a huge boulder. It was quite amusing. Yeah, but I don't know. I never felt really in danger there as far as, you know, people drawn down on us or something like that. The danger came in landmines or some silliness like that. I just think this is too much, overwhelming force, and they know we weren't there to take their bullshit. Yeah, they could capture some Europeans and they could take hostages to the UN, but they're like, yeah, that's not really going to happen. When those M1s started rolling across the bridge, they're like, oh, okay, this is a serious thing now.
Yeah, it was serious. By the way, Dickie's asking, he's like, so not part of the red teaming world I was in, though part of what we might have targeted. And I would say this, hey, Dickie, if you've got a good CI team, they're always part of your red team. I mean, we're always looking for that, because in your cyber world, you might say, we have all these machines to protect our cyber information. And I'm saying someone's going to take a nerd and put pussy in front of them and compromise your system. You don't need a robot. You need someone who knows how to do what we do. So we're part of that red team cycle. What are your thoughts on red team and cyber and that kind of thing that Dickie's asking about?
I must admit, I'm not really super on the cyber part, but the red teaming, it's a constant, right? It's constant assessment of what is the threat, what can we do about it, and how can we apply ourselves. And a lot of that is just, the case in Bosnia was knowing what was going on there, having people to talk to, trying to figure out what the threat was, because that was our, the source network thing. That's the best move you've got. Mm-hmm. We've got 4 people on a team, that's 8 eyes. You make your network in the local community where they might not be happy with the way things ended and what happened during the war, but they're plenty happy now that there's no more shooting, and they have a vested interest in keeping that.
One of the doors that unlocked for me to become a good agent was when we went out and just started asking, like, what's something we can do to help you guys? Because they all needed so much help. They were all like, like you said, the homes were blown up and they were trying to come back and rebuild them. And one of the guys was on one of the crews of people rebuilding homes that had been destroyed. And the guy's like, man, a couple of years ago, we could have had sunscreen, but instead we're just getting burned to death out in the sun. But we have to build these homes so people's lives can restart. And so we were able to go, we have all the sunscreen in the world. We're America. I'll bring a gigantic truck to you if I, have to. But we brought him a box of sunscreen, easily a couple of years supply for a family. I mean, a lot of sunscreen in a box that was only, just carry it. Here's your box, And he's like, man, you guys are really wonderful people. Let me introduce you to some people. And that opened doors. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, the whiskey's fun. The Game Boys are great. And all these other things, even money is fine. But if you just ask them, what's the smallest thing that I could do for you? They'll put their finger on the pulse, and you better pay attention and get that thing for them. And boy, it was a game changer. And I used that throughout my career. Like, I know water sucks and elections suck and electricity sucks. What is the thing we could do right now? And like, it was stuff like, that tank track is in the wrong spot. It's destroying our vehicles. So we need to move it. You can have it out there, but can you move it here instead because of the way the road? And we're like, yeah, we can do that. And so it became these things that were super simple. Were there any doors like that for you that unlocked? I mean, as you did the job and you're like, this is something that's not in the book.
I think it was just getting in front of people, finding the right people. That was one, right? We were able to find the woman who ran I can't remember what it's called, like the widows of Srebrenica. She was living in Tuzla. Yeah, we got in front of her and just seemed to care. I think that's a big part of it. I agree with you. Giving things, it's nice, especially when people have very little. But I think just the genuineness, if that's a word, and like earnestness that we care. We are asking you questions because we're going to do something. That was the entree. And then just being normal humans. I mean, we went to a soccer game. I can't remember what town that was in one time. We would give crayons and stuff to the kids to hand out the MREs when we could, just being normal human beings and having a true and believable interest in what people had to say so that we could make it better. That, I think, was the difference.
One of the things, because we had this barrier of like, oh, by the way, there's not going to be any covers. You have to wear your name on your uniform. Maybe you can put US instead of a rank, but like the amount of cover we were allowed to work under was basically non-existent. And we weren't trained on how to do that, right? And so we had to all invent our own way to do it. And one of the things I realized, and it took a long time, was just to be upfront. If they're like, "Are you a spy?" Be like, yes, I am. I'm here. I'm going to ask questions. I'm trying to find things out because I'm trying to keep people safe. I'm trying to communicate what you guys need to the Army so they can understand and do things better. I'm trying to communicate what you guys need to the government. And I'm trying to tell everybody else what everybody else needs. And they'd be like, oh yeah, you can do that all you want here. To the point where the Taliban called a meeting. We were so impactful in our region. The Taliban are like, hey, we want a meeting with those two guys. And the governor obliges them and brings us to this meeting. We have no idea this is happening. And they want to check us out. And the Taliban's like, oh, those dudes are all right. And so we had a license from the Taliban to collect and do it openly because we never hid what we did. And what we did was try to help people, and within that, there's so much information. There's so much stuff that's valuable to the commander. We just walked around and just didn't act like assholes. We were able to build trust, meet people nobody else could meet because of this approach that started all the way back in Bosnia.
Yeah. I think it just makes, it's earnestness. And then for me, again, I was a little bit lucky because I spoke Bosnian. It just made people like, oh, all right, that guy clearly took some part of his life out and learned our language. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I was serious about it. I didn't want to just speak like an idiot. So I tried hard and kept learning and carried a dictionary in my pocket and got better and better as I went.
Yeah. What's your favorite language to speak?
Probably Bosnian. I like Czech. I was much better at Czech. I did a tour and we were in Prague now that I'm in the State Department, which was pretty cool. But at the Balkans kind of always tugged my heartstrings a little bit more.
If you could change one thing about how the Army handles CI, they made you like head of CI TRADOC for, a day or whatever. Like, I'm going to turn this one dial, then I'm going to walk out. You guys you'll be better off now. What would that one dial? What would be on that thing? What do you change?
For me, it always comes down to training. I just really a focus on training. You can have whatever SOPs you want for what you wear and what you call yourselves or what you drive or how many vehicles. But I think the crux is training. You've got to focus on the training. And it's got to be varied. Ours was so cookie cutter at Huachuca, and I don't think it really prepared us for that. So having, like things like SIPSO or having other branches of training, getting people back in there so everyone's on the same sheet of music and having good instructors who have actually done it, not just I'm a professional instructor. It's like, nope, you need to, it comes with some career management, like cycling people back from the field so that they are actually teaching things that they've done and know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because you met some people, you're like, Jesus Christ, what oh my gosh, so ill prepared to teach and to have people learn things from them. What's the coolest assignment that you had or coolest day of being a counterintelligence agent?
Probably in Korea. We did a lot of weird shit in Korea. We did a lot of work with liaison. So we went to some of the, the North Koreans are always digging infiltration tunnels under the border so that in their fanciful vision, like, you're marching 10 abreast in this tunnel, when in reality, it's like a old gold mine from the 1800s. But we went to one that most foreigners didn't get to go to. And it was awesome because the South Korean intercept tunnel they dug was a perfect sphere, right? That whatever they use this amazing boring machine to drill into this just terrible North Korean tunnel. And it was cool, right? This is like Cold War still happening. It was fascinating.
Yeah. That's neat. Scariest time.
Yeah, we had some mix-ups with some explosives a couple of times in Bosnia. Like this one road we drove over all the time. One day it rained and we were driving through and like, hey, what is that? It was a mortar shell. I don't know how many times you drove over that thing. And there were, the worst, when I first got to Bosnia, I got sliced off with these Brits and a few Americans. And there was some garrison. We were just going to check out what these Bosnians are up to. And it was myself and this British female NCO, Kathy, I think her name was, walking up the gate, and the kid at the gate, he raised his rifle to like motion toward us, and then he just aimed it right at us. And it was a little freaky. I figured he probably knows what he's doing. I guess he just could have killed us if he felt like it. But fortunately, his commander came out, realized what was going on, and we talked him down, and it was fine. But it was a little nerve wracking.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, you can get killed doing that. I mean, that's, I don't know if you remember, but sort of early on in Iraq, there was an Italian journalist that was kidnapped, and she was being returned. And as they were coming back to the American camp, they, didn't slow down, and people in her car got iced because there's an 18-year-old kid going, "Hey, here comes a car on a high-speed approach. I'm about to put some rounds through it." And anytime you approach an American or any kind of real like UN camp like that, you can really at peril if you're not prepared to slow down and be like, "Hey, I'm not a threat." So you start swinging a weapon around, and even on accident, you get killed real quick.
I think we're lucky not that many people get injured, just because, young GIs are their own worst enemy. I remember the kid that, what was he doing? He was refueling a chainsaw in his tent by the light of the stove. And of course, when it all tipped over, and the whole tent burned in like 40 seconds. Probably shouldn't have been doing that. Bigger risk than probably the guns out there or the landmines.
Yeah. Any regrets on places you didn't get to? Like, man, you know what? If I could do it all again, I would squeeze this one extra thing in. It could be anything you want. Was there something you just had a longing for, or that called to you that you wanted to do?
I don't think so. I got it out of my system in the Army, and then I switched to the State Department, which I like to. People are like, "Oh, why'd you switch?" I'm like, all the travel, none of the guns. So yeah, I know I've gotten to see some places of the world in the State Department. I get to see in the Army.
Yeah,
I loved it. I got everything I wanted out of it. I still have a lot of people I'm still in touch with. Great memories. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about all sorts of things. And I recommend people go in the Army. I thought it was a good choice for me. I loved it. Just did worth in, and I moved on to do other things. No regrets.
What should I have asked you? What you're like, oh man, I hope he asked me this. Or what things should I ask you about?
I don't know. I mentioned the other day, I've been just trying to think of like, what was that year like? The beginning of it was memorable, and the end kind of, but I like struggled to remember the day to day just because we were going out and doing our thing. I don't know.
Do you want to ask me questions? I've been hammering on you for an hour. You want to ask me something?
Yeah, where were you at? You were at Doehle? Were you over there?
I was over in the rock quarry over by Zivanici. So I was with Dochko and Virginia Smith and Greg McGowan.
That's right.
And we had a Navy native speaker guy assigned to us. And it's funny because he had 3 chevrons and an eagle over the top. And he's Navy. And so no one knew what to do. So they're like, we don't know what to do. We're just going to salute you. Because they thought he was like some kind of sergeant colonel or something,
Our linguist Mala had the opposite problem. She was wearing earrings in her BDUs, and she kept getting flack. And I actually had to go do research, and I can't remember how I found this out, but actually you can wear earrings in the Navy, like studs. So yeah, that's stuff you learn.
Yeah.
I don't know. What was your favorite thing down there
in Bosnia? As much of a challenging person as Bart Dochko was. And I would say this to Bart's face. I mean, I don't think he would refuse it either. He was great, man. I mean, he was like, it's your guys' mission, like you're going to guide what we do every day. I'm going to make sure that you're doing the right things, but I'm going to teach you how to do this. And I don't know how he learned all this stuff. I was like, how in the world did you know all this stuff? Like when we were in Hungary, he went down the road and some guy gave him like a pie or a cake and a tin. I don't know if you remember this. Oh, you were already there.
No, I wasn't there.
And I'm like, how did you find a guy with the cake? And so I just thought, man, you're an hassle. But in a lot of ways, couldn't have picked a better guy because he let Greg and I go out and do it. And we did a great job, And when he realized that we had these potential sources, He's like, well, you're going to run these sources, and hardly anybody else got to do that. So it's hard to complain about that. So it was a very unique thing. And man, I remember like one of the days when I really jumped forward, we had to do a shitload of like screening type things, just hundreds of people. And I just got so damn good at asking questions. Like I could ask 3 questions with 1 question, and they would just bing, 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 answer all 3. And I'm like, if I got better at asking the right questions, I can get a lot more information. I could be more elegant. I don't have to take 5 hours to do this and bore this person to tears. And so I just got better at that stuff. And I started learning like, this is how you craft. But those were some of the things that I was like, this was an incredible experience, to be able to go out and do this in real time. And kind of like your Macedonian thing, it was really like a practice, like a high risk practice run at what was going to happen the next, 15 years of my life.
Yeah, I think, they didn't know anything that was going on when we got there. I remember they were like, we need more linguists. So for whatever reason, we were picked to do this. And they put ads on the radio to go to the university in Tuzla. Hey, if you want to be a linguist, go there. The Americans will be there. We're like, all right, we don't know what this is like. We rolled down there in a couple of trucks. And we get there. There's hundreds of people.
Wow.
And we had no plan, right? It was supposed to be like a security screening, but like, what do you ask these people? So we had to figure out, all right, what should we ask these people?
Right.
Should we be responsible for seeing if they speak English or not? Is that part of this thing? And it was just all on the fly. And I think we were some of the first people to roll into like Tuzla proper to figure out what was going on there. And it was just a mess. But we managed it and got a lot of linguists, and it worked out fine.
One of the things that is a little bit shocking is when you get there and you're first, there is no network. Even if we're bad at handing off networks, you really don't know. And the intel is going to come from you. Like you can't like go to anybody else and ask because there's nobody there. And so you had to go and figure out like, who is the guy we have to talk to? And so that means you have to talk to anybody, whether they walk up or you walk out or whatever it is. And that networking piece, boy, like just understanding how to do that well and how to like get from not this guy's important because he knows the next guy. And that guy probably isn't important, but he knows the next guy who might know the right guy. And you don't know how many layers you've got to get through. Understanding that and being patient with that and understanding that, look, we're all puzzle solvers, right? You can't solve this puzzle in one day. It might take you 4 months to get a sniff of what it might be. And then even then, this is an aside, but it'll go right to it. Whenever I went to a new unit, I'd go see the 2 captain, right? And I would say, how good is your intel picture? And if they said anything north of 60%, I knew they were full of shit, and I acted differently towards how that unit did it, right? Because I knew that we didn't know shit about shit. We talked to, I don't know, let's say we talked to 150 people reliably in our area and the time that we were there. Maybe it's 200, but it's not 5. And there's all these people everywhere that we never even got a chance to meet with, right? Because it's just, you don't have enough time. Yep. That scope and understanding that and having to just look around, like, it doesn't really matter what you do right now because you have to start somewhere. So step 1 is, hey, go talk to that guy and see if you can get him to like you.
That was us. I mean, we flew in, right? So my team flew in before all the bridges were built. And we showed up, the UN was still there. The place was kind of a mess, and no one knew what was going on. They were transitioning to 1st Armored Division. And for that was just a lot of walk-ins. People would just come up to the gate, which was weird because there were all these platforms. And I saw Cristiano Amanpour over there. They were just filming, all the Americans are here. And it was just chaotic weirdness. And it started slow. People coming up to us, and that's how we figured who was a good person to talk to. And then the logical question, who's in charge of this town or this village or whatever it is, and go find them and go talk to them, and trying to tromp too much mud into their house and have some strong coffee and some rakia and just make a connection.
Yeah, totally. Here's my last question for you. Ready? And it's pretty simple, but it's going to have a little bit of a prop. What do you want to tell this guy? What do you want to tell that guy right there? He's about to deploy, or he has just deployed. What does he need to know that he doesn't know?
He needs to know that probably his male pattern baldness is affected by that helmet. But trust yourself, I guess. You know what you're doing. That's just for, I think you kind of said the same thing, is you hit that point where, no, I know what I'm doing. It's fine. We're going to be fine. someone has, for whatever reason, put me in charge of this thing, and I will run with that to the fullest and have confidence in myself. That one, yeah, I was probably a little unsure, but yeah, just be confident in your choices. As long as you make good decisions and look to keep your people safe and get the job done, you're fine. You have nothing to worry about. You don't need to compare yourself to anybody else.
All right, that brings me up one more thing, and I hope you have time for this. But I worked on the camp cluster where in 2004 a guy walks into a chow hall and blows himself up. You know, and you're just like, God damn, how did we miss this? You know, how did we? And we hadn't been there long enough to reliably prevent that. Maybe we could have a year later, but probably not. You just don't know. But when something like that happens, we also had a suicide bomber drive up right outside of our office. Now, our office is protected by a 20-foot cement barrier, so it wasn't directed at us. It was directed at the gate that was right by us. But when pieces of that dude are raining down and parts of his car, in our little, I wouldn't call it a courtyard, but what else can you call it? It's the bow of where the wall was. And so between our front door and the wall was just this area where you could stand around and be fucking hot because there was concrete all around you. But as we're looking and smelling this dude, what's left of him, how do we miss this? You know, like when the stakes get higher and people are having their eyes carved out, people that you talk to are having their eyes carved out of their head. These are Iraqis, right? Man, it changes how you approach the game in a way that is hard to explain and also hard to shake years later. I mean, did I get these people killed? Did I not get them? You know, could I have done more? Should I have done something different? How could I have done this better, faster? And also not a very permissible environment, right? It was very dangerous out there. What are your thoughts with that?
I think people dwell on the negatives, right? You give someone bad feedback, they dwell on the negatives. But what if you're not on the board at all, right? What if you aren't in play? Then what happens? So they get sneaky. They find the right person. They figure out the right way to get a suicide vest into a place. They figure out a way to build a good car bomb and get it right up next to the walls. But what would they do if you weren't there? If we weren't doing our job? How much greater would the chaos be? How much bloodier would the mayhem be? So I think it's you can't dwell on you got to be right 100% of the time in the CT world. You just can't dwell on that. You must take your wins, acknowledge that they existed, not dwell on the losses. I mean, be a fucking human being and realize, okay, these are people. Let's work on things, but it's just constant moving forward and getting your head in the game and keeping people safe.
On being in the game, when you hear the stories about, there's bounties on Americans, it's like, where you been, man? That's normal. And not only that, if we're doing our job, if we're on the board, if I've got a number in the game there, and I use my own name, I use Pete, right? Because I want to hear the intel report when they're like, hey, holy shit, Pete, they're targeting you. Perfect. That means I'm on the field. It means I'm having an impact. And that's great, And usually I'm surrounded by a platoon of badasses, so I'll let those guys do their badass job. But it means if you're doing our job, God damn it, you've got to be targeted. They've got to know that you're out there. Otherwise, if the commander doesn't know who you are and the enemy doesn't know who you are, then you better go out with Pete and Chris and go get known, because that's how you compete.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the mix, that's what happens. You don't have to be there if you don't want to be there. Fine, but that's what happens, right? I went to Macedonia because I volunteered. I was guaranteed 6 months down after I got back from Macedonia, but I immediately volunteered to go to Bosnia with the assault command post because I wanted to be there, and I volunteered to come back to Bosnia. And yeah, people do that because you want to be in the action, and if you are wise, you realize that is the possible side effect of that. It's, again, I never, my time in Iraq was with the State Department, so it was people bitching about there not being enough yogurt flavors in the dining facility. But it's still dangerous. We took a lot of incoming there. If you aren't up for that, don't do it. But know that if you come over here, just by virtue of being here, you're now on the board. And the randomness is universe. A rocket might fall through the roof of your pod just as likely as anyone else's. So deal with that.
Yeah. And as a guy that ran around Eastern Baghdad trying to get them to stop launching rockets at the green zone, we were desperate trying to solve that. But what do? You just randomize your patrols, walk as fast as you can. And then I would have to ask these like super fast, hasty interviews because we couldn't stay in one place for too long, all in an effort to try to keep that random rocket from landing in that random spot. And they didn't much care if it landed anywhere. That's one of the things we learned. They just wanted to launch it and make us worry about it and take up resources trying to prevent it from happening. The whole thing is crazy to think that my work was tying into, even if you weren't there when I was there, the version of you that was there. It's all interconnected in how we play this game.
Yeah, I admit to having some sleepless nights in Iraq because we took a ton of incoming for a while. One day I got a little coffee pot at the PX. I was in the green zone at the Rehoboken Palace, and they just had coffee pots come in at the PX, and I got one. And like a week later, a rocket hit the big one, like 240, hit the landing zone. And as I'm running out of my room for the bunker, there's all this glass shattering behind me. But in the back of my mind, all I was really thinking was, man, I hope that wasn't my coffee pot. And it wasn't. It was good. The mirror's all shattered and the glass and the windows broke, but my coffee pot was fine.
That's so funny. All right. Well, anything in closing before I wrap this thing up?
No, I know young guys. It's funny. You probably see this too. A lot of young guys and gals in uniform out there doing it. It's great. I think that I'm way too old for that stuff. I'm glad it's behind me, but there's always a new generation, right? And they're doing things differently, and they probably look at us like fogies to some level, but they're doing things that we learned, we figured out on the fly. So good on them. And they're going to learn things that we never figured out, and it just keeps chugging forward. And that's, I think, the legacy that we leave behind us.
Hey, thanks for spending some time with me and some extra time. Let me wrap this thing up. Stand by for 1 sec.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you.